Welcome back to the weekly real estate review. I'm Dave with the Bella Group. Thanks for coming back. Over the last couple weeks, we've talked about the real estate market from the buyer side, from the seller side. One of the things that I've gotten a lot of questions about is what's the impact of all these foreclosures now that the foreclosure moratorium is ended? So I want to dig into that in some detail. In order to do that, I want to tell you a story that you probably already know. In this quote here from Sam Cater from Freddie Mac says, the main driver of the housing shortfall has been the long-term decline in construction of single-family homes. On this slide, we can see how many homes were built each year going back to 1970. In the early 2000s, there was a big peak, then a big drop-off that coincided with the housing crash 2007-2008. Since then, about 13 years, we've been below that average number of homes every year, and that's what's caused a big portion of the gap that we're seeing in supply. And then as we look on this slide, you can see that 9.3 million households from 2006 to 2014 went through foreclosure, gave up their home, or sold in a distress sale, a short sale. 2 years ago, when COVID hit, there were a lot of concerns that we were going to see a repeat of the housing crash in 2007-2008, especially with foreclosures, people losing their jobs and not being able to pay. Forbearance has helped us with that, and I want to talk about what the impact of that has been. And I want to look through the numbers here. And as you can see on this chart, there was an estimate early on that as many as 30% of the 53 million loans in the United States would default. That's a big number. If all of those loans defaulted, that equates maybe 30 months of inventory if all those houses hit the market. The peak number of mortgages in forbearance was in May of 2021, and that was about 8.5%, about 4.5 million homes. In August, it was down to 3.5%, and now in December, we're at 1.67%. It's about 850,000 mortgages that are in forbearance. And forbearance is a process whereby the lender and the borrower work together to come up with modifications to the loan so that the borrower can get back on track and make the loan current again. So I was curious, how did the forbearance process work out for those that have been through it already? Because we're down to 850,000. At one point, we had 4.5 million, and as it turns out, about 7.6 million mortgages have gone through the forbearance process to date. So looking at this chart, which came from the Mortgage Brokers Association website, we can see the results of the forbearance process for those that have already been through it. What I did here is I took the categories that we see and boiled it down into three categories. Those that were successful in working through the forbearance process and getting themselves back on track, or at least having a mitigation plan in place, those that don't have a mitigation plan in place, and those that actually lost their house. Looking at those categories, 83% exited forbearance successfully. There's another 16.7% that are at risk because they were not able to come up with a successful risk mitigation plan. And then there's a final 0.6% that lost their home because they were unsuccessful in coming up with that risk mitigation plan. So I'm interested at the at-risk and lost home, which is about 17%. I want to take that 17% and bounce that against the projections and actual number of homes that went through forbearance and determine what the impact would be on the real estate market if that number of homes actually came onto the market. The first bar on this chart looks at the original projection that 30% of mortgages in the U.S. would go into default. Assuming 17% of those mortgages that went in default actually ended up coming onto the real estate market, that equates to about 5 months of inventory. Adding that to the 2 months we already have brings us to 7 months, which is a little bit higher than that 6-month equilibrium we like to see. So it's not good, but not terrible. If we look at the peak number of forbearances at one time, which was in May of 2021, we see that if we take the 17% of those actually coming onto the market, it's about 1.43 months. In August, it's a little over a half a month. And today, where we only have 850,000 homes and mortgages that are still in forbearance, that's about a quarter of a month of inventory. What about the total number of homes that went into forbearance at any time, that is about 7.6 million homes. So we take that 7.6 million, take 17% of that, it's 1.2 million homes. That equates to about 2.5 months of inventory on the market. So if we add that 2.5 months to the 2.1 months that are out there now, we're at 4.5. But I want to make a couple of quick points. The first point is it's not going to all happen at once. It's going to happen over a long period of time. I'm making the assumption that it happens at once just to have the worst case scenario. The other point is that there is still strong demand out there for 3 reasons. Interest rates are still low. Even though there's talk of them going up, they're still low. The second, millennials are buying in force, and they are the largest generation. And third, COVID is still driving people out of higher population density areas. So in Connecticut, there is still a lot of good demand coming from that. The reason I bring that up is if we were to actually have 2.5 months of inventory added to the market right now, a lot of it would get consumed by those buyers that are putting in multiple offers and missing out on multiple deals. So we really wouldn't see a big increase in inventory. Some portion of it would be bought up almost immediately. So as Ivy Zellman says in this quote, the likelihood of us having a foreclosure crisis again is about 0%. Bringing the Connecticut picture to the table, this data comes from the Connecticut Judicial website, and it's the number of foreclosures every year going back to 2000. As you can see, we're averaging about 10,000 right up until the housing crisis. Then we peaked around 23, 24,000. And then in 2019, we were back down to 10,000. 2020, we only did about 5,000. Well, that's because there was a foreclosure moratorium that was put in place. In 2021, really haven't seen anything for the same reason most of the year was a foreclosure moratorium. So looking at the 2 orange bars all the way to the right, the first one is the number of homes that are currently in forbearance. It's 23,100 in Connecticut. If we took 17% of that, it's about 4,200 homes that would come on the market. So even there, less than half of the number of homes that were being generated by foreclosures before the housing crisis of 2008, 2009. I think all this data tells the story that although there was fear early on, there really is no data backing up the concern that foreclosures are going to cause the housing market to crash and prices to crash down. As I talked about in a video that I'll link to below, we expect about a 5% increase year over year going forward. If you have any questions or comments or like me to cover any other topics, please leave them in the comments below. If you found anything of any value in the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to see more content like this, please subscribe and hit the notifications. I'll be putting these out weekly. In the description below, there are links to my winter buyers and sellers guides. There's no obligation to get them. You don't have to provide any contact information. Feel free to download them at any time. Thank you again. I hope to see you next week and have a happy new year.